Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to debrief a little bit around what went down last night at what I think is, again, one of the more consequential board meetings that we've done a recap or debrief about. So we wanted to dig into a couple of things. There are a lot of moving pieces last night. And so we're going to dig into two topics specifically. One was the ESSER plan, what we're going to do with ESSER dollars. And then two is around vaccine mandates. So let's get started with the ESSER plan. So again, for the folks that do not know, the ESSER dollars are dollars that are going to be given to Minneapolis public schools from the federal government to help recover from what's gone on in the pandemic so far. The part of the America Rescue Plan. And so over the last, since about April or May, the district has known that they're eligible for about $160 million. And they started to engage with community stakeholders. AEC, I was a representative of AEC on this stakeholder committee, as well as other folks. They engaged with folks to try to figure out how should they use this money, what should this money be used for? And so we met for over the course of about 6 weeks at the end of April into the beginning of June to provide feedback and insight as to what this money should be spent on. Then they took that feedback over the course of the summer. They've created a plan. We met again in the end of August to kind of go over the plan and see what they had shared. We didn't have any idea we knew what they wanted to spend money on. We didn't know how much money they wanted to spend on each of the things. And so I think that's important to note. Last night was the first time everyone got to see how they actually, like the actual dollar amounts assigned to different line items. And so we haven't gotten a chance to really do a big, deep dive into what that money is going to go towards. But I do think there were some interesting things just that I captured right off the bat, just like scanning over the budget. And so the big things that stand out are the three biggest line items are going towards kind of changing or handling some of the airflow in select schools across the district. So that's going to be a $14 million investment. There's going to be an $11 million investment in technology. And so I think actually the $14 million investment might be going towards technology, but to help get us to a one-to-one district. But then the largest investment is going towards staff and program continuity, which is at $74 million. So by far our largest investment that is going towards program and staffing continuity. And I just wanted to take a moment to talk about that with you, Heather. How do you feel about that after what we've gone through in the pandemic, as a parent in the district, obviously? What does that mean to you about the district's values and kind of what is this money being allocated in the ways that you would hope as a parent?
I think one of the biggest problems for me is that, so through this whole process, we and the coalition and community members that we work with have been following this all along. It really is hard to give community buy-in or weigh-in if you don't see the dollar amounts that are attached to anything. If you look at this whole big list of things they're going to invest in, and you're like, oh, the things that we care about are going to get big money, then we're on board, right? But until those dollar amounts came out last night, we feel less on board, right? That I feel like is one thing. But the other thing that I'll say is, I thought one of the key values was that we wanted to spend this money in a way that could be continued, because this grant that we're getting from the federal government, it ends in 3 years. We have to spend this money in 3 years. We can't stretch it over 10, right? So we have to finish it in 3 years. And so the fact that we're spending $74 million of it maintaining staff means that at the end of this 3 years, we got to cut all that staff. And I thought we were trying to, it's I don't understand how this is living our values, or is this just us again in MPS literally refusing to live within our means? If we lost this many students and we can't afford this many teachers, then we can't have this many teachers.
Well, and the other thing that I would argue is that it's great that we want to invest in some level of stability, especially in this what has been a very unstable last 18 months or so. Um, but like you said, are we setting ourselves up for failure? And part of me wonders, like, are we doing this because we don't know how to live within our means? I would say no, because I do not think that Senior Officer Giap like would let us live outside of our means. But are we doing this because, again, we are committed to, I think the way that the superintendent would argue it is like, we are committed to our staff. We want to create stability for our staff. But what does that mean about what we're investing in our students? And I think there are lots of other things that we're going to look at and examine in this budget over the next few weeks that, I just wonder, could we have done more innovative things than, maintain stability? But that's also a really, really hard question, because if you're the leader of a system and you have all this money coming in and you would say, no, you don't want to, maintain your staff, like your staff is going to feel some kind of way. Like that's, I understand the difficulty of that proposition in front of you, especially like letting people go in the middle of a pandemic. Like I really, really get that. I understand how hard that feels. And also, like, we are like, this district is charged with educating students. This district is charged with trying to address some of the learning loss that took place over the last several months, 18 months, but really for a much longer amount of time. Like, students of color have been experiencing learning loss before before this COVID-19 pandemic. And so, yeah, I think that was just, it's hard to see like such a large investment in staffing stability and program continuity.
I also think, we were around to see the drastic budget cuts happen for Office of Black Student Achievement. We were in the boardroom, right? We've seen how those programs, the Office of Indian Ed, right? Those programs got gutted. This feels like an opportunity to bring us back to some level of stability with those programs. And I'm sorry, do you have the numbers? Like, what did we end up giving these programs?
Yeah, and so out of $160 million in a district that severely struggles to engage Black students and educate Black students, and severely struggles to engage in like our American Indian population as well, the Office of Black Student Achievement got $125,000 out of 160 million. Office of Black Student Achievement got $125,000 for graduation coaches. I don't know how many graduation coaches that gets us, but that's what it got. But they each got that. Our homeless and highly mobile population, the specific line items for them got $110,000. And this is just at like an initial look, right? Like, I'm just purely looking at what are the line items, what do they say? I don't necessarily know. Obviously, I think there's going to be other money that goes towards these populations overall. But like, to the specific things assigned for them, when we talk about, as a committee stakeholder, we said we wanted to see these dollars used equitably. We wanted to see these dollars go towards the students that were most deeply impacted. When you start talking about, our Black students, our American Indian students, our homeless and highly mobile students, all getting less than $200,000 of a $160 million budget, like, I'm not sure what that says about our values, right? And I think that's really difficult, especially then when you look at another line item that I just kind of thought was silly is, and I get it, right? I think that's a part of like building a well-rounded student, but we're spending $330,000 on lifeguards at 3 middle schools, but we can only afford $125,000 for the Office of Black Student Achievement, $125,000 in Indian Ed, and $110,000 for homeless and highly mobile students. Also, we know that essentially, from everything that we've heard, special education students essentially got zero services since the pandemic started, right? Like, they have gotten very, very little support. It's been really, really challenging and very difficult. And, out of the $160 million, $7 million, it looks like, at least, is going specifically towards special education programming. But I don't know, that, like, when you're saying that you have to address learning loss, I just feel like this is a population that you need to invest more heavily in. Like, don't get me wrong, $7 million is a lot of money compared to the $125,000, but for the amount of services that need to be made up, and also to where it's going, I'm not sure if that $7 million is being utilized. If that's like a large enough investment for this population that for the special education population that's been like severely divested from over the course of the pandemic and also like several years.
Yeah, and I think, I think that what I've heard, and I would love to hear more from special education parents, is really that their hopes was that some of this money could go toward like the infrastructure, toward integrating special education students into gen ed classrooms, right? So the actual like integrating, and so I guess I would love to just hear from special education parents, like what exactly that would mean, what that would look like, what kind of dollar amount they would need. I would love to learn more about where they feel like these dollars, and how they feel like these dollars should have been spent. And again, I think that the fact that we had representation on the committee is different from like us getting this line items that seem very far off from what you said you shared as values.
Right. And so what I thought was really interesting, especially when we're looking at the $74 million of continuity of services, right? I just also thought it was interesting that like $9 million allows us to like, save 90 teachers, but $8 million allows us to save 233 special education assistants. Like that is unbelievable to me, and also speaks to like what is the investment that we are putting into our professionals that are supporting our special education students. Like we know that we're starting this year with so many special education assistant shortages, and like if $8 million can buy us that many hours of special education support as compared to classroom teachers, like that feels like a real issue to me for us to figure out like long term. And again, if you saw our recap and you saw my do better moment from Director Inns, these are the questions that I want my school board representative digging into, not digging into why are we spending $1 million on a licensing body? Like, sure, figure out what that's about. But there's been plenty of conversation about that. And so I just think that was a really, really, I just think that there's a lot to examine. And so we're going to do the work to examine this and try to share as much as we can about this with you over the next couple of weeks, because this is a really important investment that our board and our federal government, our board and our school district is making in students. And we just need to ensure that it's actually being spent in the ways that we want it to.
Yeah, I also just need to name that like this issue where we have a largely white teaching force and a largely, BIPOC SEA force, and then we look at the disparities in those numbers for the pay that results in racist implications, right? Like that results in inequity. And so for us just to continue to like act as if that's the thing that we're going to do, instead of using this money to be innovative and say, how do we create a living wage so that our support staff, people of color, do not have to have two jobs in order to be able to serve and work with our students? And like I just like, I don't know, to me that just feels like in no way did that live the values that I've heard us talk about for a long time. Okay, so the other main conversation that happened last night, and we will have more to say about this clearly, but the other main thing that we really need to talk about was this vaccine mandate that was voted on last night. Now, kind of going into a little bit of a deeper conversation, Director Jourdain kind of at the last minute brought up what he wanted. He wanted to amend this proposal, and he wanted to say that he wanted to require student vaccines. And so last night we kind of got into a long conversations about like how we aren't really there yet to require student vaccinations, and we kind of heard some really good reasons why we're not there. Sounds like we could be there in some months, and that we might need to be there in some months, but for right now it's really important in our city that if you are a volunteer that has access to children, if you are an employee, even there was a long discussion last night. Do school board members need to? Are they required to be vaccinated? You know, and then like what if you don't or can't get vaccinated? You have to take a test every week. And so then, you know, when we say people have to test, we have to provide the test and the process for that. And so it was really interesting. You know, we're in this world of like unknowns and unprecedenteds right now. And so there's a lot of things you have to think about when you make a policy. But overall, I think it was a great first move for our district to and the board to vote on a vaccine mandate for staff, teachers, volunteers, support staff.
Contractors.
Yeah, yeah, contractors. That's another one. You know, I think as a parent, that makes me feel safer. And to know that the board is and legal are thinking about the ramifications and the plans for what a student mandate would look like, I think also is good. I think it was a monumental night, and I'm really proud of our district on this one.
Yeah, I think it's a significant, again, it's a significant thing that I think Minneapolis will take for granted. And I'm
That's
not
right.
saying that in like in a bad sense. It's just like part of our culture. It seemed like we are much more open to vaccines than other cities and other school districts that are struggling with this kind of thing. Um, I was very struck though last night about like this. It was like this really interesting interaction, honestly, between like director Caprini, who like kind of asked the question a little more informally than I think most questions are asked, but she asked the question around like how are people going to prove whether they're vaccinated or not, and like are they going to show their card or whatever, and then director Ellison responded saying like yeah, you know, we'll make sure, and then like all of a sudden Superintendent Graff jumped in and said no, we're not sure about that actually because of privacy concerns and all of that stuff. And so to me that just actually brought up a really important thing around while this vaccine policy is in place, there is actually, it doesn't sound like the district is going to require that they show proof of vaccination, and they're just going to have staff, volunteers, and contractors kind of like say that they have, and then like if the district were ever to find out that they aren't actually vaccinated, then like they'll have to deal with the consequences of providing false information. But I don't know, that also that seems like, how's anyone going to find out if I was vaccinated if you never asked for my vaccine? Yeah, for my vaccine card. And I just wonder, is there a way to collect some type of verification without violating privacy rules as an employer? And I also, all of this is kind of happening in the context of like the pathway out of the pandemic, and you know, President Biden issuing kind of his plan and some of his requirements for how we move forward. And then also, I think this question about students being vaccinated coming a week after LAUSD actually said that they are going to require vaccinations by all eligible students by the end of essentially the school, that all students have to be fully vaccinated by the end of this first semester, right before holiday break. I think that was that was the impetus for this conversation, and I just think that there are so many interesting conversations that are now going to result because of all of this and who's going to be first. It sounded like Minneapolis did not actually want to be first in requiring vaccines for students, or amongst the first in the nation. And then it was also interesting to hear the general counsel of the district say, while yes, we require vaccinations for mumps, measles, you know, all of those things, I guess, it's actually a very different thing. It could be a very different thing for us to require a vaccine for COVID. And, you know, we just have to figure that out. And it also sounds like we have to figure out how we're going to figure out, like, what if a student were to falsify that they have gotten vaccinated, what's the repercussion for that, right? Like, it's one thing there might be a repercussion for staff who falsified hiring documents, but it's another thing, like if a student were to falsify a vaccine document or a vaccine like that they gotten vaccinated. There's just so many questions, like you said. And so I think ultimately it was a good thing that the board did not require student vaccinations, because doesn't seem like a clear plan on how that would be enforced or how that would be administered. But I do think I hope that the interest in that now has the school district leadership looking into what would creating a plan for that actually look like. So I didn't hear that directive from the board, but I hope, since there seemed to be some level of interest from board members, that the district will kind of explore that. And I think it'll be interesting to hear from folks around, like, how do folks feel about a student vaccine mandate too.
Yeah, it's interesting. When it comes to vaccines and parenting and schools, I'll just say my kids were on a more relaxed vaccine process. So we didn't get 4 shots every time we went to the doctor. We got 2 and then 2 more. And my kids didn't have any live vaccines until they were 5. And so when you start to think about vaccines in schools, I had they needed to go to the doctor last year because they turned another age, right? And so they need another set of boosters. And yeah, the school called and was like, we need this, right? And so there is a precedent for that. And now we're just asking for a new precedent for a new drug. It feels pretty straightforward and like it's something we're going to have to get to eventually. But obviously we know, like, where we are in America right now is so complex with this. So I think that as we see vaccine rollouts for younger kids, I think that once that happens, the vaccine mandate for our students probably won't be far behind.
Yeah. Well, with that, we have debriefed kind of the biggest parts of last night's meeting. So thank y'all for listening. We'll have more about, like we said, about the ESSER funds and how that's being allocated, and much more, actually, because last night was a big meeting. But thank you for listening today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Bye.